does that mean I can bone my brother? Well, technically, yeah. Morally? Questionable. I feel like it's kind of like commentary on cult culture, like being in a cult and maybe like stepping out of a cult. Hello my dear friends, my name is Sanne and welcome back to another video. Today's video is gonna be extremely long. You've already seen the timestamp, but this video is gonna be long, so be prepared, get cozy, get yourself a drink, a snack, whatever, because we're going to get into another book today. And I actually wanted to be talking about 3 books today, because we will be discussing the Gardener Kings book series. And first, I wanted to make one video with the entire trilogy, but I was writing down the script for the first book, which is at this point the only book I've read, but I want to do the entire series. But I was just writing down the script for the first book, and I have like 15 pages. This is like a ginormous script. So I felt like if I was gonna do all 3 books in one video, this video would be 5 hours long probably. And I'm not really planning on making a Lord of the Rings trilogy kind of thing. So we're just gonna do an episode per book. So it's gonna be 3 episodes and I'm gonna be releasing them hopefully one week after the other. So that is the plan. Today we're gonna talk about the Gardener Kings, the first book, which is called The Gardener Kings. And I'm gonna be doing my makeup inspired by the book while I'm talking about the book to you. I read this first Gardener Kings book after I got it for free on Kindle. It was like free for a short period of time, and the cover art was so beautiful, and I was like, ooh. So I was really drawn into it by the cover art, so I decided to read it. I didn't really know what it was about, I just knew it was some sort of fantasy story, and I read it because of the cover, and then I had some thoughts on it, because wow, there's some, I don't know, it's there's some weird stuff going on in this book. I also have some positive thoughts about this book, which is, I feel like, a first, because usually with these videos I tend to get very negative. Because negative thoughts are like fun to talk about if there's something wrong with the book. If I like a book, I'm usually just like, yeah, I liked it, and that's it. So negative thoughts are usually better and more fun for a video, but I also have some positive thoughts about this book, so don't worry, it's not all bad. I'm just gonna give you a few warnings for this video, because I will be talking about the entire storyline of the book. It will be completely spoilers everywhere. I will just be discussing the entire book in summary, so we can discuss it. I will include as many spoilers as needed to like be able to discuss the story. So if you don't want that, if you don't want to hear these spoilers, that's fine. I'm gonna give you a short summary of the book before that doesn't contain spoilers, so you know what you're getting yourself into. Then if you still want to read the book, you can go read it and then come back to this video and we can discuss together. But if you don't want to read the book, that's fine, I'm gonna discuss all of it. More warnings. This video will also be extremely chaotic because my brain is chaotic and I will probably be all over the place, especially when I'm doing my makeup. But it's gonna be fun, it's gonna be entertaining, so. And I'm gonna like include all my thoughts on this book. So it's gonna be really, really long, but you've already seen the timestamp, so also don't worry about that. Let me first get you a nice spoiler-free summary of this first book. It's The Gardener Kings by Monica Boothe. It came out in 2022. This book series is a young adult fantasy trilogy, and it is based on Celtic mythology. So that was actually quite interesting to me, because it was a tiny bit different than some other like regular fantasy stories with dragons and everything. So this was very fun. This story is about Inion. Inion lives with her father, who is a king, on a small island, and they basically have the perfect life, at least Inion thinks so. Except for the fact that her father used to be king of a country called Garrett. And he was chased out of this country by a traitor who rallied up all the people, and they basically chased out the king and his 12 most loyal soldiers and followers. And then they fled to an island and started living there. His followers basically want nothing more than to return to this island, but the king doesn't really want to go back for some reason. But in the beginning of the book, Inion finds out that she is actually a foundling and not really the daughter of her father, the king, which kind of changes her entire perspective on the life she's been living and what she wants to do with her future. She also ends up falling for the king's son, Rian, But she's not allowed to marry him, and he's not allowed to marry her, because he can only marry women of royal blood. So they go on a quest, go back to Garrett, actually, to return to the home country of Inion, to see if they can find out who her parents are, to see if she does have royal blood or not. So a lot of stuff happens, and young Inion starts to question everything that she knows, everything that she thought was true, and she starts to question her trust in the family that she knew, and it's actually quite interesting. And she also discovers more about the gardening magic that her family possesses. If you're into like lighter fantasy reads, I would recommend this book because there is not a lot of like world building and new characters going on. You will see a few characters throughout this book, but I feel like if it comes down to it, there's like 5 or 6 important characters in this book. There is a map included. I put it up here. There is a map included in the story, but it's, as you can see, it's not very detailed, it's not very big, which just shows you how not excessive the world building is, which is nice in this case, because I was looking for a fantasy read that I could just get through instead of it being confusing about where I was, where other people were, what was going on. I love complex fantasy reads, but sometimes I also just want a lighter fantasy read. So if you're into something that's a bit lighter, a bit more easy to follow, but still enjoyable, I would recommend this book. And I would recommend you read it before you get into this video, because like I said, from this point on there will be spoilers. Spoilers ahead, spoilers everywhere. So do with that what you will. If you want to read the book, go pause this video, do it now. It's available on Kindle. And if you're still here now, that means you're ready to get into all the spoilers. So let's get talking about all the rights and wrongs of The Gardener Kings by Monica Boothe. Before I get started on the story, I'm just going to be doing my makeup. I'm going to be doing it inspired by the cover of the book, which I found absolutely beautiful, so I think it's really fun to do a makeup look around that. I won't be discussing my makeup throughout the story, but I'll link everything that I've used down below. So let's talk about book 1 in the Gardener Kings trilogy. This book starts out with Inion, who is a 16-year-old girl, and she lives with her father, the king, and a few of the king's followers on an island. The island doesn't have a name, they just call it the island. I don't know why, they just never named it, I guess. But they live there together, they live a very peaceful life, and Inion has basically only known the life on this island, and she loves it. She is absolutely in her element. She loves spending time with her father, loves to watch her father garden, because he loves to garden. There's only one thing that she doesn't enjoy very much, which is kind of a side plot, and I feel like it will come back more in book 2 and 3, so I will discuss this as well. The followers on this island, they believe in a goddess named Awel, and she is kind of like pictured as being the wind. The people on this island, and especially the king, they make offerings to this goddess, and they do it in the form of blood offerings. So there's basically this altar where they go and they plunge their hands down on a spiky stone on the altar, and the blood will flow from the hands, and then they offer their blood, so basically their life force, to this goddess. You don't have to do that, Inion never does it. But Inion doesn't really like Awel. She doesn't like the fact that her dad has to offer his blood to appease a goddess, basically, and she feels like the goddess takes too much and doesn't give enough. But that is some sort of side plot, so just put that to the back of your mind for now. In the first chapter, we also find out that the reason this group of people live on this island is because the king used to be the king of a country called Garrett, but one of his close friends, apparently, and most trusted people, turned out to be a traitor and took over the throne by rallying the people of the country against the current king. And on the day this happened, the king and his 12 guards, basically the Knights of the Round Table, I guess, his most loyal followers and helpers, they fled the country. Which is odd, because the people didn't really have an army to fight against the king, So the king could definitely have fought back the people with his 12 guardians and he would have won. But for some reason the king ordered all the people, or all the guards, to just flee and not fight. So that's odd, but that happened. And they have been living on this island for like 16 or 17 years at this point. So that is basically the basics of life on this island. They live there with all the followers, the king, his daughter, Inion, and one person that I didn't mention yet, which is Rian, which is the king's son. So basically, Inion's brother, right? She's the daughter of the king, he's the son of the king. They're brother and sister. I would like to emphasize this for later use. So Rian is the son of the king, so Inion's brother, and he is a tiny bit older than her. I think it's mentioned like 3 years. He loves nature and gardening as well. He has that from his dad, but he likes the like unruly nature, not like the neat rows of rose bushes that his dad likes to plant. He likes the unruliness of the flowers and wildflowers and trees and everything. He also feels like he is a bit trapped in the village, so he spends most of his time living in the forest near the village. He's kind of like built himself a little hut there or something from trees, like a tree house, and he lives there, which Inion thinks it's a bit sad because she doesn't really get to see her brother that often and she misses him, but that's the way it is. He's just there, and sometimes he does live in the village. He basically says, I live in one place until I can't take it anymore, and then I go live in the other place until I can't take it anymore, then I go back and forth. But these are like the basics we find out in the first chapter. And in the first chapter we also see a very lovely and heartfelt discussion between Inion and her father. She calls him Atha, by the way. I don't think he really has a name. They just call him either the king or Atha. And I think Atha just means dad, I guess. So in this conversation, the king reveals to Inion that she is actually not his daughter by blood. She was found in a tree, of all places. She was found in a tree by him, and then he just took her in as his own, and he was like, you are my daughter now. He does keep saying, like, this doesn't really change anything, and he tells her, like, you still are my daughter. I just need you to know that it's not by blood, because it does change a few things for the future, but not for the fact that you are still my daughter. The reason why he's telling her this is, he says, and without king's blood, you cannot marry a prince. That's why I tell you this now. You're 16 and beginning to think of such things. I don't want you to be disappointed. And Inion thinks, but I've never wanted to marry a prince. To do so, I would have to leave the island, and I love our island. So Inion is like, why are you telling me these things? I don't really care. But she is worried that, yes, it does change things, because the one thing her dad keeps telling her is, blood is everything. That's the quote, blood is everything. Which is also why they offer blood to the goddess. So her not being blood related to her dad, she feels like is actually quite a big important thing. And not just like her dad said, it doesn't change anything. She feels like, I think it does change things because blood is everything. So she's very like confused about her feelings and how to live with this newfound information. So she decides to go and visit her brother in the forest, and she does this quite a few times actually. So she loves visiting her brother in the forest. At least she loves visiting her brother. She doesn't like the forest. She feels like the forest is a bit against her or something. So she goes to visit her brother in the woods, Rian, because she misses him. And one thing we learn is that both Rian and his dad, like I said, they love gardening. They're great at it. And they love growing plants, and they seem to have some sort of connection to nature, like some sort of magic. They are able to grow plants really easily and exactly the way they want to. They can manipulate the forest, for example. The king is very like neat and organized, and he likes the flowers and some like fruit trees. And Rian just really loves the wildness of nature and the forest, and he just lets stuff grow everywhere. And that is kind of like their two different personalities as well. And her father actually used to tell her stories about a gardener king. And she always asks him, are these stories true? And he's like, yeah, of course. And then she's like, is it about you? No. Inion goes and visits her brother in the forest. But she is while she's being there, she, like I said, she doesn't really like the forest for some reason. And that is because she used to hear stories from her nanny, who took care of her growing up. She was telling stories about this forest back in Garrett, which was basically an enchanted forest, she would say. It was dangerous. People that went into that forest never came out. And she always told Inian about this forest, and she told Inian that this forest on this island was exactly the same. But according to Rian, this forest is nothing like it. It's not evil, it's just a forest. But Inian still feels like really uncomfortable. She thinks everyone that gets lost in this forest never comes out again. So there's like a spooky vibe going on when Inian goes into the forest on her own to find Rian. And at one point in the book, it isn't the first time she goes into the forest, it's like later on, but she gets like lost and she freaks out because the forest just looks the same everywhere. She can't find the way out. And then she is kind of led out of the forest by a stream of wind. And she just assumes later on that this is Awel, the goddess. Awel is following her around basically and guiding her a tiny bit, but still she wants nothing to do with her. She finds her brother. She wants to tell him about the adoption thing, but she decides not to. She's just really happy to be there with him, and she's like, it's just gonna spoil the mood. We're gonna leave it. So she just spends time with him. And from their conversations, it is very clear that Rian, the brother, he really wants to return to Garrett. Which is also a bit odd to me because he was 3 when they left Garrett. So I'm like, you probably don't remember that much from that country. It's not like, it's like, oh my god, I need to go back to my home country, But it's more of like a thing, I think, that he wants to earn back what is his right. So he feels like, I am a prince. I should be prince and later king of Garrett, but my dad, the king, doesn't want to go back. Which is mean, basically. He feels like his birthright is taken away from him. But he keeps saying it in a way like, oh no, the people of Garrett, they need us. Because they are manipulated by this traitor that is now their king. And we need to go save them. We need to be their protectors. Well, it's also a bit like, you just want to be king, don't you? But he's like obsessed with going back to Garrett, and the king doesn't want to go back at all, so they have fights about that quite a lot actually. And Inian also doesn't want to go back to Garrett because she has never known Garrett, and she's just like, I love the island, I want to stay here. They stay on the island, but like I said, Rian doesn't really agree with it, and he has a lot of fights with his dad about it. So this is kind of like the setup of the book. We've had the setup. We know the most important people. Inian and Rian. They're the 2 main characters of this book. They have a dad, who is the king, and Rian wants to return to Garrett, but Inian doesn't. That's the main premise, basically. So now we get to a point where there's just a few chapters of learning about life on this island and seeing the relationship between Rian and Inian develop and grow over time. We learn about the life on the island, which they have festivals for every single season. That was a really fun part of this book, I feel like, learning about the festivals and how they celebrate the seasons. They were described really nicely, and it gave me like a really cozy hometown feel, like this small community that is celebrating this nice festival and the harvest together, and it just feels really cozy and nice and just enjoyable. So it's just a fun thing to read about and learn about a bit. And they do discuss all 4 festivals in detail, I think. So, it's fun to read about those things. And we also learn that Inian is really skilled at weaving plants, like making flower crowns, making baskets, that kind of thing, using plants. And she's extremely good at that, apparently. It's mentioned quite a lot, actually, but I don't feel like it really makes a difference. She uses it like 1 or 2 times in the book later on, but it's not like the most important thing. So these chapters basically cover the period of like a year. So all 4 of the festivals. They're basically going through the motions, going with the gardening and whatever. And throughout this year, we also figure out more about the day that the king was chased out of his country. they learn that the villagers actually burned down the castle gardens, which of course is the king's big pride and biggest love, basically. The king is really like against talking about what happened that day, and Rian thinks it's very important, so this is another one of their clashes, basically. They keep going back and forth about what is important for Garrett and what they should go back, they shouldn't go back, the king doesn't want to talk about it, Rian does want to talk about it, that kind of thing. Because Rian just feels like he needs to save his people that are taken over by this evil man. And he needs to return. And the king is like quite happy just living there, which makes Inyeon like question her father's reasons a tiny bit, basically. So he's like almost overly obsessed with staying on the island and not going back, which makes Inyeon question him a tiny bit. Like, why? Is there a reason that you don't want to go back? Because they don't have an army, so you can take over with your guardians, because they are skilled fighters, but for some reason the king doesn't want to go back. And Rion is like overly obsessed with going back and taking back over the country and just reclaiming the kingdom and what is his, you know? So besides learning all of that new information, we also see Inyeon and Rion going back and forth a tiny bit. Inyeon goes to visit him quite a bit in the forest, like every few weeks, and then she just stays with him for a day. Then he stays in the village for a few weeks again, and they spend a lot of time together. And they just kind of grow closer and closer. And also Rian at one point surprises her with her own tree house in the forest that he made for her. But yeah, you see them kind of getting closer and closer to each other. And she talks about missing Rian a lot when he isn't there. And they are extremely close for brother and sister, I must confess. And again, the thing that keeps being mentioned is blood is everything. Inyeon keeps being reminded of that, and she keeps questioning, like, what exactly is my role in this family now that I am not related by blood? Why am I here? Do I really belong to these people? Because she feels like she belongs to the island and she is supposed to stay there, but she's very confused about how she fits in with the rest of her family still. And she wants to discuss it with Rian, but she is very hesitant to do so. Because she feels like, because blood is everything, Rian will kind of realize blood is everything, so you're not my sister, and he will push her away. That's what she is afraid of. While she loves Rian and misses him so much, so she doesn't want him to push her away. So the festivals in the meantime are going on, and this is like really cute with the weaving and everything. Because Inyeon weaves a lot of flowers, and she also likes to weave them into her hair and everything. And then her dad was like, he saw her all dressed up in the flowers, and he said, I thought the earth wore the gardens well, but I see now that you wear them better. Which I think was really wholesome and cute. I like that quote. And in spring, so it's like half a year after she found out that she is adopted, she has the thought like, wait, if I was found on the day that everyone was fleeing from Garrett, it is possible that I'm the only one who may not have realized that I'm adopted, because everyone was there. So is it maybe the case that I am the only one who didn't know that I was adopted? So she starts to question that a tiny bit. So then she decides to finally tell Rian, because she's like, maybe he already knows. Turns out, yes, he already knew. Basically everyone on the island knew she is adopted, but no one ever told her, out of respect for the king probably. But yeah, Rian kind of confirms to her, yes, he already knew, and it doesn't change anything. He still sees her as his sister and he loves her, which is a kind of weird thing to say with what's coming up. So yes, he does see her as his sister. It's a lot of going back and forth for a few chapters, just a lot of Inyeon going to Rian, Rian going to her, hanging out, growing closer, having fun together, whatever. They also sort of kiss at one point. She talks about that she had her eyes closed and he gave her a kiss on her forehead, and then it was something like, do I notice that correctly? Or did his lips kind of brush against mine? I'm like, ooh. Which warrants the quote, I wonder if Atha has noticed how much time Rian and I have spent together this spring, or the change in our relationship with one another. There has been a change, hasn't there? Which warrants another creepy quote. This may have been Dad's plan all along. All the old tales Fionn, which is the nanny, used to tell us. Many of them involved a father who fostered a foundling with the express purpose of raising a wife for his son. I hate that. I hate everything about that. Inyeon is kind of considering that she does like Ryan quite a bit. And she is adopted, so she might as well be his wife, I guess. And she does fantasize a lot about getting to marry Ryan and living together on the island, and it just creeps me out because remind yourself, these are brother and sister. They have been brother and sister for 17 years. And now Inyeon finds out she's adopted and she's like, oh, does that mean I can bone my brother? Well, technically, yeah. Morally? Questionable. The fact that she just keeps fantasizing about it as well, and she's just like obsessed with it. She's like fully in love with this man who has been her brother. Like, for him it's a tiny bit less weird because he knew she was adopted all his life, but still he treated her as a sister and he knew her as his sister. But she knew nothing other than the fact that he had been her brother all her life. She just recently found out that it's just not by blood. So that's wild. So she keeps fantasizing about marrying him. And she even prays to Owl at some point, which is like, she doesn't like Owl. She has never prayed to Owl before. But this has made her so desperate wanting to marry him that she resorts to praying to a god she basically doesn't believe in. She basically prays to Owl like, let us be together forever. But Ryan still doesn't propose to her over the next few months, and she's like so desperate about it. She's so confused about her feelings. Because she thought he liked her too, because he did kiss her at one point, like I said. So she was like, he's gonna propose to me sometime soon. And he just didn't do that. And she was so confused and desperate about it that at one point she just gave up. She was like, never mind then. It's fall again. So it's been about a year since Inyeon found out that she was adopted. And then she decides to kind of just like fuck it and go in, and she kisses Ryan. And he does kiss her back for a bit, but then he kind of just rejects her. You're like, yes, good. Tell the delusional girl that she can't be in love with her brother. But no, that's not what happens. No. He rejects her, but not because he doesn't want her or because she is his sister. He rejects her because he had already discussed marrying her to his father, and he's not allowed because she's not of royal blood. That's the issue? Not the fact that she's your sister? That's the issue? He's discussing this with her. Like, I talked to Atha already, but I'm just not allowed to marry you because you're not of king's blood. And that is apparently extremely important because blood is everything, like has been mentioned 7,000 times in this story before. And this is basically the point where the story really takes off and all the action starts happening, kinda. Because the two of them come up with a plan. Since they're not allowed to marry because Inyeon is not of king's blood, Ryan is like, but we don't know what kind of blood you do have because we don't know who your parents are. Which, technically, yeah. So they decide they want to go to Garrett and figure out who her parents are. So if they are of king's blood, they can get married. And Ryan is like really fully convinced about this. He's like, no, we're gonna go there and we're gonna find out that your parents are kings. So then I can marry you. We just want to confirm it, basically. And she's like, I don't think it works that way, but... And she's like, okay, well, if you're so convinced about it, then yes, we'll go. Yes, sure. We'll go to Garrett. Even though she's like, she never really wanted to leave the island. She's like, for this man, who is my brother, I will leave my safe haven and go to a dangerous place and try to find out who I am. You never really cared about it in the first place, but now that it will be the only way you can marry your brother, you want to go. Which, okay, valid, I guess. They come up with this plan to go to Garrett together, and they just will find out who her parents are, which is wild to me. Like, I don't know, you've never been in this country before, you don't even know where to search, if she's gonna be king's blood, she's not gonna be of the king of that country, because then she would have actually been Rian's sister and the king would know. So I don't think it's gonna be easy, but they are convinced it will be the easiest thing in this entire world. So, you know, whatever. They make plans to leave the island and go to Garrett. The king is not very excited about it, of course, because he doesn't want to return to Garrett, and he thinks it's very, very dangerous for his children to return to Garrett, because they're children of the banished king. So, yeah, that's probably a layer of dangerousness for them. So he's not very excited about them, but in the end, he approves. Because he wants his daughter to be happy, and she is like, I need to know this so I can marry the love of my life and then I'll finally be happy. So they take a rowing boat and they row all the way across the sea towards Garrett. They have like this background story made up so they can tell people they are not who they are, just to protect themselves, you know? However, while they were rowing towards Garrett, they get into a storm, like just a few kilometers before they reach the shore, I guess. And they get into a really big storm and they are capsized. They basically nearly die, but it turns out Inian has some sort of connection to the ocean. Basically in the same way that her brother and her father have a connection to the earth and the plants. She has a connection to the ocean and she can swim like easily. She's like going freaking fast. She saves the both of them. And they get on shore and they are basically immediately captured by soldiers. So they're really worried because they're talking about taking them to the king. They're like, oh my god, they're gonna find out our identities immediately and they will kill us because we're not supposed to be here. Rian is shipped off to the castle to be interrogated by the king, and Inion is taken by the prince as his slave in a camp that was near where they were caught. It's like a war camp, basically. And the prince is staying in one of the tents, and she is supposed to be his slave. The prince is called Phyalon, and he's a bit of a dick, basically, but he has his moments. In the next chapter, he's like, he has some charm to him. And Inion sees the charm, and I was like, will you dump your brother and go for enemies to lovers? But no, that's not what happens. Don't get your hopes up, please. From the information that they have gathered, this is the prince. The prince from the traitor. I don't think I've mentioned the name of the traitor that took over the country. His name is Kealach, the evil traitor that took over the kingdom. And Phyalon, she assumes, is his son. So she's extremely worried about Rian going to see the king, Kealach. But somehow Rian manages to escape while Inion is just having a good time, I guess, being the slave of this prince. He is very, like, you know, it's the thing that, like, oh, she's still my slave, but I'm being, like, nicer to her, so, you know, so it's supposed to be a redeeming factor, I guess. Rian escapes and he comes over to rescue Inion, but at that point the entire war camp needs to move because something has happened at the castle. The other son of the king has killed the king and taken over the castle. So Inion's like, oh my god, Kealach, the traitor, he's dead? What? And she's like excited and confused and she doesn't know what to do. So they follow the rest of the people. Inion is being a bit dramatic. They are being taken to a next camp or something because, you know, the king is dead. Inion is being like very dramatic about everything, and she's like to Ahwell, like, if I can't be with Rian forever, I would rather just stay here and be killed as a slave instead of not getting to be with him or something. And Ahwell, the goddess, she's trying to help her. She's like pulling on her hair with the wind. Like, oh my god, you need to escape right now, basically. And Inion is like, no, you didn't help me to be with Rian forever. You failed me, so I won't listen to you. At a certain point, they are able to escape, though, from the line of people that is moving towards the next location. They walk a while just because they're, you know, trying to get to a different part. But at one point, they reach like a lake, and Rian is very, like, for some reason he's very, like, excited about reaching this lake, and Inion doesn't get it. But it's because Garrett doesn't have a lake. Lochmar has a lake. Lochmar is the country south of Garrett. So that means they weren't in Garrett at all. they weren't captured by the king of Garrett. Garrod, I don't know how you pronounce that, but they weren't captured by the king of Garrod. They were captured by the king of, or the prince of Lochmore. So that also means the king who was killed is not Ceallaich, the evil man that they kind of want to see killed. So that is kind of a disappointment, but whatever. At least they escaped and they realized they are in Lochmore and not in Garrett. So they still have a little while to go. So they reach the lake, they start walking towards the lake and everything. And then they hear voices. And it turns out there is a boat on the lake. And they are basically rescued by the people in the boat. And this is, of course, extremely such a coincidence and so convenient that the woman in the boat is actually the granddaughter of Ilion's nanny, Fionn. Fionn has been talking about her granddaughter for years to Aelion, like, oh my god, my granddaughter was up to do this, she was so cute, whatever. So Aelion has heard so many stories about this granddaughter. And Fionn told her before she left, like, oh my god, can you see if you can find my granddaughter and see if she is okay, you know? And of course, the first person from Garrett they actually run into is, of course, the daughter that they were sort of trying to find. Ooh, coincidence. A lot that happens in this book feels just a little bit too convenient, you know? It's a bit too easy. They are allowed to travel with this daughter of Fionn. I forgot what her name is. Aerlis, I think. Aerlis. They are able to travel with Aerlis and her husband Aiden, because they are going back to Garrett anyway, so they can travel with them. But of course they can't tell them that they know Fionn and whatever, because then it'll come out that they're children of the king, and then they will probably be killed. They can't tell Aerlis they know her grandmother. They travel with Aerlis and Aiden, and they travel quite a bit because they're going back to Garrett. So they quickly reach the border of Garrett and Lochmore, and they go into Garrett. While traveling with these two people, they do figure out more and more about the country. They just learn more and more about what the country's state is right now, which is interesting because Inion is kind of open to learning everything, and Rian isn't. Because they learn from Aerlis and Aiden that the people in Garrett are actually really happy with the current state of the country. Ceallaich, the evil trader, he took over the country, but he didn't announce himself king. He announced himself a magistrate. And the thing is that when he dies or he steps down, the next magistrate will be chosen by the people. And the people of Garrett actually call themselves the Free Country, because they're the only country without a king. And they actually love their life. They're doing great. And Inion is like a bit confused because on the island she's only heard stories about this evil man. And now everything she hears about him is all positives. So she is a bit confused. And she doesn't really know who to believe. And she has a couple discussions with Rion about this as well. But Rion is like fully convinced that these people are brainwashed by the magistrate. He's like, no. They only think that they're happy. Everything these people know is all a lie, and they know the actual truth, even though they have been living on an island for 17 years and have no clue what's going on in this country. They know better. That's what Rian seems to think. Inion gets more and more confused because has her father been lying to her? Is there another reason they had to leave the country? What's going on? Inion is starting to think, like, my father had lied to me for the past 17 years about me being his daughter. So what else could he be lying about? Could he be lying about something to do with Garrett? Is there a reason why he didn't return, maybe? And she is just starting to doubt everything. She's even starting to doubt if Rian is really in it as much as she is, because he keeps talking about, Garrett and the country, but is he really that devoted to finding out who her father is so they can get married? Or does he have his own personal things? So they have like a discussion, like, everything is going bad. We have no idea where we are. They're just a bit disheartened. So Inion is like, do you still want to continue looking. Do you still want to keep going? Because everything sucks, basically. And especially Rion was thinking this way, because he was thinking, like, this entire country is really taken up by this Gerach person, and it's pretty dangerous for Inion to be here. So he offers to go back home. But it wasn't to go back home, but it was to send Inion home, and he would go back and return and look for her parents. So at least she could be safe with their father. And she's thinking, I thought he was offering to give up altogether, but that wasn't it, was it? No, he was offering to send me home. He said he was relieved I wanted to stay, but it would be easier for him, wouldn't it, if I were gone, safely stowed away at home? Easier for him to find Kealar and take him out. Easier to form a rebellion, to take back the throne in the name of the king. Surely Atha would return then. And wasn't that what Rion always wanted? For as far back as I can remember? Wasn't Garrett his first love? So she's just questioning things, like, is Rion really in it as much as I am? Because he just seems to care more about the state of Garrett and the country and the people than about finding out who her parents are. He's still, like, obsessed with it, but he's, like, positive about that. He's more like, oh yeah, we'll find that out, and then we'll figure out that we can get married. And then it'll all be fine, so no need to discuss that. But we do need to discuss the fact that all these people are a fan of Kealar, which isn't supposed to be that way, apparently. So, you know, this is just over the course of a few chapters. We're traveling with Iris and Aiden. We're learning more and more about the country. We're learning more that the people actually love Kealar. Rion is not convinced. He thinks they're all being manipulated. Inion is just questioning everything. She has no idea who to trust. Because she also feels like she can't trust her own family. And we also learn more about the history of the country. Like, for example, the thing with, you know, blood being everything and kings or princes can only marry king's blood. We learn from the time when their father, the king, he was younger. And they learned that their mother, or at least Rion's mother, Inion's adoptive mother, she was shipped in from one of the neighboring countries. Because she was one of the only other few princesses with king's blood. And all the money of the country basically went into that visit to impress the king to give up his daughter. And the country basically went into recession because the king wanted to throw a big ass party to woo this princess, basically. And Iris says, no, not in all the kingdom was there one maiden good enough. He had to import them, king's blood and all. So what we learn from these people is that the people in Garrett actually don't give a shit about blood. For some reason, only the king and his family are like, blood is everything, blood is the most important thing. But the people of Garrett are like, blood is nothing. Inion is seeing things from both sides now, and she's just confused about everything, basically, and she doesn't know what to think. Inion also learns that her father had even already made arrangements for a princess to be shipped in for Rian when he was like 2 years old, because that was basically the only King's Blood princess available, so he wanted to snatch her right quick, which is absolutely wild. But that all fell through because, of course, the king was chased away. And she discusses this with Rian, because she has heard all these stories from Iris, and she discusses them with Rian, and she's like, is this true? And Rian is like, no. If it were true, my dad would have told me about it. Like, but would he, though? Would he have told you about it? So, you know, these discussions keep going on, and Rian is just fully convinced that everything they learn in Garrett is just fake, false news, and he is refusing to learn anything new, and it's showing. But Inion is just slowly starting to be convinced that her dad is just keeping information from her. Remember I told you about the 12 guardians of the king? 11 of them fled together with the king to the island, but one of them stayed in the country, and he stayed in like a cave, so he could keep an eye on the country and then send word to the king if something bad happens. And this man stayed loyal to the king through everything, which is absolutely wild. Because Inion and Rian decide to visit him. Their dad told them, you should go visit him. If anyone knows anything about your parents, he should be it. So they go and visit him. They find him in his cave, but he is dead. He died a few days ago. So they bury him. But this man has literally lived for 17 years in solitude in a cave, just because he believes he's king over anything else in this country. So it's a dead end, literally. And they have no idea where else to look. So they go and walk, and they have lost Ireland and Aden. So they're like, we're just gonna go to Bryn, which is the main city, the capital. We just go there. Also because Ireland and Aden live there. So we'll see them there probably again. Enion was found in Bryn. So maybe someone there knows something. So they decide to go to Bryn. On the way over there, they find another altar of Awel. And Enion is like, no, not Awel. Don't like her. Still, like I said, I feel like Awel will play a bigger role in the coming books. I have no clue yet because I haven't read them yet. And this is also like the first time in the entire book I feel like Enion is standing up to Rian. Because in the description of the book, the summary, it is said, if you love a strong female lead. And throughout the entire book I was feeling like this is not a strong female lead whatsoever. Because every time something happens, she's like, oh, I'm waiting for Rian to find me and save me. And otherwise I would just rather die because I can't be with him. And every time he's like, oh, we should do that because that's the right way. And she's like, oh, okay. So there's nothing very strong female lead about it. And also the fact that she feels the need to stay in Garrett because otherwise Rian will just lose focus and first go over, like, prefer winning back Garrett over finding her parents. I don't know. The fact that she's just like, oh, I need to stay and not even put him in his place or anything. And also, in the first chapter, like, in the first part of the book, she waits a whole year for him to make a move, and then she just gives up. In the end, she does make a move herself after a year, and she's, like, desperate. Not very strong female lead to me. And this is, like, 75% in the book, and this is the first time she stands up for herself. They want to go and look at a different country, because, of course, if she's gonna be of King's blood, she's gonna be of a different King's blood. So they were like, are we gonna go to a different country? And they want to go to the country to the north of Garrett, which is Tergwin, which is also the country that Rian's mother came from. Irelis, from Aden, she also wants to go there. And Rihanna's like, oh, we should go together. That would be nice. And she's like, Rihanna, we can't do that because then the chance that they'll find out that we're the daughter and the son of the king will be even bigger. So we can't go together with Irelis. We really can't. And finally she's like, I don't want to go with Irelis. So they don't go with Irelis. They decide to first go to Bryn, stay a night there, and then travel forward and go to Tergwin. When they get to Bryn, they of course see the castle for the first time. They're like, oh my god, this is the castle. While they're looking at it, you can just feel Rian getting more and more obsessed with the castle, and just he can't take his eyes off of it. He's like, oh my god, that's my castle. It starts to feel a bit iffy. So they decide to stay for a night, and they ask this old woman if they can stay with her in exchange for some chores. She allows them. She's like a grumpy old woman. Everyone is like, oh, she's just, the weird old woman that no one talks to. But she is also the only person who thinks Ceallaigh is terrible. So is that a hint? Who is right, who is wrong? We don't know. But yeah, they stay there, but they do run into Irelis and Aden, and they're like, oh my god, we missed you because we lost you. You're all fine. That's good. Let's have dinner together. So they're having dinner together, and at one point, Enion kind of slips up and tells them, like, basically she tells them, we know your father, or we know your grandfather, the Guardian, because he is one of the Guardians. And like, we know your grandfather, and they're like, Irelis is like, what? And they kind of just cover it up a tiny bit, but Enion is convinced that Irelis knows what's up, that Irelis knows they are the king's children. She's like being really paranoid about it. So I'm just like really afraid that their Ceallaigh himself is gonna come after them because, terrifying. And in the same conversation, something is mentioned about a princess of Tergwin that may have gone missing or something. And Rian is just fully convinced that this princess is Enion. Which would also still be weird because that would mean she is his mum's niece. Yeah, she would be his mum's niece. Because her brother would have become king and then gotten a child, which would have been the same age approximately as Rian. Yeah, his mum's niece would have been Enion, which would still be weird. Like, inbreeding, oh my god. It's not that much better than the fact that these are siblings trying to get married, but Rian is convinced, so he's convinced, like, yeah, we should go to Tergwin. Yeah, let's do it. Aegon isn't so sure, but Aegon isn't sure about anything at this point, so she's not much use, actually. And she has a conversation with the old woman while Rian is working, and the old woman's like, why are you with him? Why are you engaged to him? And she's like, because I want me. And the woman's like, you don't have to be, you know? Because you can do so much better. Like, you can live way better without him. That man is no good. So yeah, it's the next day, and Aegon and Rian are doing chores while Aegon is talking with this woman a tiny bit. And she's just so paranoid that Keala himself is gonna come up to them and like capture them. But she needs to go to the edge of the wood to grab some of the plants that are needed to weave the bed of the woman, which is the chore that she promised to do. Because of course she's good at weave. So she's super paranoid. She goes out to the forest. She's like enthralled by the forest, and she goes in a tiny bit, but then the forest just... That's the enchanted forest that their nanny always talked about, so... She's just getting weird vibes, so she runs back to Rian. They finish their chores, and Inion's like, we need to leave. We need to leave this town, because they're gonna find us any second now. And she wants to go to Turquin right now. Like, at this we need to go. And they decide to walk over there, because there are like a few different ways to go there. But if they want to take a boat, they'd have to work in the town for like a week to get enough money to borrow a boat. And Inion is like, we need to leave now. So we're just gonna walk. Let's just walk and we'll see where we go. So they are discussing their plans on going to Tarquin. And suddenly they hear a man, and they're like, the man is like, hey, shit, we were being listened to. And the man is like, I'm a shepherd. I have a little lamb, and the lamb needs help because he's like a broken leg or something. So they decide to help the man, and they kind of just follow him or something and walk with him. But they're kind of a tiny bit suspicious of him, of course, because he has heard what they were discussing, of course. And they walk back with the man, and when they get closer to the castle, Rian asks the man, like, what happened here? Because the land is, like, burnt down and not usable. And the shepherd is like, yeah, these used to be the castle gardens, like the king's favorite thing, the true jewels of the king, you know. He cared more about his gardens than the people living in this country. We burnt the gardens 17 years ago, and nothing wanted to grow there, only one tree, and it grew like really fucking fast because it has been there for 17 years, and it looks like it's over like 200 years old. So it's a really big tree. And they kept trying to cut it down, but then it grew back in like a day and it was completely big again. So, you know, enchanted tree, great. Rihanna's looking at the tree with utter adoration. More adoration than he ever looked at me with. The man explains that when the king was there was such a big difference to the way the king lived and the way his people lived. The people were always poor. They always had to put in all of their hard work and their crops and everything so the king could throw lavish dinners for his fellow kings, and the people were just living in poverty while the king was living his best life. So that is why they decided that day to take over the kingdom. He proudly tells them, I was the one who got the order to burn down the gardens, and I gladly did. So he did, and you can see Rian like get mad because he's just in his brain talking to this tree or something. He feels the tree and he's talking to the tree, and the tree is angry at the man because the man burnt down the rest of the gardens. Rian kind of like spurs on the tree to engulf the man, and in this process the man is like, oh my god, you're one of them, you're one of the evil garden wizards. The man gets like completely taken up by the tree, like completely engulfed, and he's just inside the tree, and so we assume he's dead. And Inion is so shocked, and it like really shows Rion's true colors, because he cares more about the legacy of the kings than a man's life. He literally killed a man who was speaking evil of his father, and he cares more about that than the life of one of the people who would be one of his people, the ones he came there to save. But he killed one of them because they spoke a tiny bit evil of his forefathers. It just shows his true colors. He is still fully convinced that everyone there is manipulated. Everybody in his country keeps telling him that the country is way better off without a king, but he just doesn't want to hear it. And he screams at this man, like, Garad never has been nor ever will be a kingless land. You have a king whether you will him or not. while he's killing the man. Inion is just upset and shocked, and she doesn't really know what to do with this. And now they have to really run and hide because Rian killed a whole man. So they need to run, and they decide to run for the forest. It's basically the only place to go. And Rian is like, you know, I'm still a gardener king, so I am king of the forest. So the forest should listen to me, so we should be safe there. Which he is still convinced he's the prince of this country. He hasn't been for 17 years. So, you know, the man's a bit delusional. So they're running through this forest and they're having a conversation about everything. And Ion is still in shock. And Rian is still fully convinced that their father is the absolute saint and he does no wrong and he's never told a lie in his life. But Ion is just not convinced. And at this point, it turns out the stories of the people falling into the Shadowlands are true. I actually really enjoyed this next scene. It was written really, really well, and I really liked how unique it was in a fantasy aspect. The two of them, they fall into the Shadowlands. And the Shadowlands basically consist of everything that isn't what it's supposed to be, I guess. The forest is still there, but it's not the forest. Like the leaves are made of frogs. The fire is made out of bees. The flowers are birds. The water are fishies. The forest itself seems to have a heartbeat, and it's just freaking Inion out. Rion is just like fully comfortable walking there, but Inion is like, oh my god, it freaks her out. So basically the entire forest is alive. And they run into an old woman who is like obsessing over Inion, basically. And especially obsessing over Inion's blood, because Inion is young. Oh my god, her blood will be the best. And she keeps talking about how precious Inion is. And then it turns out she's some sort of shadow witch. And she just really wants either pieces of Inion's hair or drops of her blood or whatever. Just because she wants pieces of Inion. Because Inion is like nice and young and fresh. Or something like that. And she's being really creepy. And she's like talking in riddles the entire time. But she says that she can answer questions in exchange for the blood. Inion is like, okay, we'll ask her how to get out of this forest in exchange for my blood, because she wants my blood. And Riena's like, we're not going to do that, because we don't know what she's going to do with the blood, and blood is everything, Inion. We can't just let her take your blood. And they just keep going back and forth, but they're stuck in the Shadowlands. They don't know anything. Inion realizes if the witch really knows everything, and she can answer every question, can she also answer the question of who my father is, who my parents are? Then I can just give her some of my blood, because otherwise we're just gonna go on or back, and then we'll live without the answers forever, and life will suck anyway. So why not just give her some of my blood? And Riena's like fully against it. And they have discussions, and this is like the moment Inion actually stands up for herself, and she's like, no, I want to give some of my blood. I need to ask this question. You don't get to decide for me. She does what she believes is the right decision, but that also teaches her that Rian is not in this quest as much as she is. And Rian does not want to marry her as much as she wants to marry him. You have the power. You've had it all along. Say it. Say you'll marry me. Say you don't care what my blood is. Say you'll marry me no matter what. No matter who my father is. Tell me that blood isn't everything. Love is. Love is everything. Say it. But he doesn't. And Rian just kind of talks his actions right, or at least he tries to. He's just telling her that he's always wanted her. But she's like, I love you, Rian. I love you more than anything. I would do anything. Give up anything to be with you. Anything at all. And that's the difference between us. Rian is still like, you're not of king's blood, so I still can't marry you. Because blood is everything. And he refuses to give up his belief for his love for Inian. Which I also think is good, because I don't want them to get married. They're brother and sister. They shouldn't get married. They really shouldn't. Rian is like, okay, fine, take a vial of my blood and a drop of Inian's blood. Because the drop is needed to figure out who her parents are, just to, unravel her bloodline. They go through it. The witch tells them everything. She tells them how to get out of the Shadowlands. And then, of course, comes the shocking reveal of who Inian's parents are. And, of course, I don't know if you had expected it by now. I don't think I had while I was reading, because there was just a lot going on. But her father is none other than Kealar, the evil traitor. So they learn this, they're both, especially Inyeon, she's in shock, of course, and they try to flee from the witch and they get out of the Shadowlands and whatever. And they're both extremely upset. First of all, Inyeon is not king's blood, so they can't get married. And it's not just the fact that she doesn't have king's blood, she's also the daughter of the evil traitor that took over her father's country. So basically her father's mortal enemy. So she doesn't really know what to do. They don't need to go to Turkwin now because they have figured out who her father is. So they don't need to go to Turkwin to figure that out. So Rihanna's like, I guess we should just go back. And Inyeon is just afraid that life will just kind of resume as it were. But she doesn't get to marry Rian, but she does get to see him every day, which is gonna hurt. And her father is probably gonna, like, silently hate her a tiny bit because she is the daughter of his mortal enemy. So she's like thinking, I don't really want to go back because I would be sort of like standing out in the village. I would be just, pushed away by everyone. So she tells him, Rian, okay, fine, we'll go back. Let's just go sleep first. And then we'll borrow a boat or whatever and we'll go back. And she can just feel Rian drifting away from her because Rian is just in his brain like, she isn't king's blood, we can't marry. So Rian is just already pushing her away. And Inyeon can feel it. So, I don't know, it's just not gonna work. Which I'm glad it's not gonna work. So Rian goes to sleep. She kind of stays up all night. She doesn't know what to do. She's thinking. And then when the sun comes up before Rian wakes up, she gives him a kiss on the forehead and walks away. And goes on to walk towards the castle of her father. So that is how book 1 ends. Which is, I enjoyed it actually. I'm first gonna finish up this makeup and then we'll talk about my final thoughts on this book a tiny bit. So, be right back with that. Okay, I'm back with the finished look. I decided to do blue lips as well because the character on the front has blue lips. And I have these wild lashes, but I think they're very cool. But we still gotta discuss my final thoughts of this book because we have discussed the storyline of the book. We know everything that happened. We know how book 1 ends. Shocking. But my thoughts. I've already sprinkled some of my thoughts throughout, but I have some closing thoughts. So the ending I did actually really like. It's slightly predictable, but I don't think I predicted it while I was reading it. I was a tiny bit shocked. I wasn't like, oh my god, plot twist, but I was like, oh, yeah, makes sense. The Shadowlands scene was very, very fun to me, the way that was written. It was very unique. I really enjoyed that, so that's definitely a pro. It constantly had me on the edge of my seat, that final part, so it worked really, really well. And I think it's quite a fitting ending, because she finally decides to choose for herself, but then she also realizes that Rian will not choose her. So by choosing herself, she loses Rian, because she constantly has been choosing Rian and letting herself run in the background, basically. So I'm glad she figured that out, because Rian is a dick, basically. Yeah, I don't know. She's better off without Rian, just like the old woman said, she is. And I think overall the book was a pretty fun read. I read through it quite quickly. I enjoyed it. Some of the dialogue was a bit cheesy. I did like that it was a lighter read. It didn't have a ton of world building and everything and background. It was really easy to get through. And I'm definitely, like I said, gonna read part 2 and 3 because I will be discussing that in a video as well. Separate videos, of course. So, of course, the main thing that I did not like about this book, the main thing, you could have guessed it. The fact that she wants to marry her brother. The incest, it's just creepy. It weirds me out. I don't like it. And I don't like that we're supposed to root for them throughout the entire book. The only inkling that I'm getting that I'm not supposed to root for them is the fact that Rian is kind of toxic. Just a tiny bit. Which I'm glad that he is. I'm really glad. I'm glad that in the ending she chose for herself and she left Rian. But I don't understand why the beginning of the book, legally? Is it allowed? Yes? Morally? They have been living together as brother and sister for 17 years. They have not known anything else than the fact that they are brother and sister. And just because you find out that you're adopted, you're suddenly, ooh, So this means I can bone my brother? Why? No. Mm-mm. It's so, so weird. And I feel like the story would have been so much less uncomfortable to read, like with that in mind, if the storyline would just be a tiny bit different. Like they could have written in that she was the daughter of one of the other people on the island and they were childhood best friends, and then it was like, because now it's like basically a friends to lovers kind of thing, but they're brother and sister. We don't do siblings to lovers in this household. Oh my god. If it would have been friends to lovers, and then it would have still been like, oh, you're not the king's daughter, but you were a foundling, so maybe you were someone else's daughter, so we can go to Garrett together. Then it would have still been the same thing, to be able to marry each other, and then it wouldn't be uncomfortable. They also could just turn it into a sibling story. She wants to find out who her parents are, and he wants to go back to Garrett to take over, but they're not in love. Then they could just go back together and support each other. That would also be good, except for the fact that I feel like Inyeon would not learn as much about herself, because this relationship does teach her a lot about herself and to stand up for herself and choose for herself, because he is being like overly protective of her and not allowing her to do anything by herself and make any decisions by herself. So the fact that this relationship is here is kind of good for the character development, and I'm glad to read that she left him at the end. But at the beginning of the book, you're like supposed to root for them, and it's supposed to be like a normal thing, and you're like, it just creeps me out. It doesn't need to be incest for it to be a toxic relationship, you know? Like like what I said, if they were childhood best friends, they could have still worked in the toxic relationship, and then Inyeon would still go through the same character developments. Don't tell me you think it's not weird, because ugh. So when I'm writing the script, like I said, and when I'm filming this video, I haven't read book 2 yet. So I'm just gonna make speculations on book 2 and like the character arc of Inyeon. So if it's going where I think it's going, it will be, the book itself will be like a really great commentary on stepping out of toxic relationships, but also stepping out of cult culture. Inyeon grew up in a very close-knit community of only a few people, like isolated from the real world. That she only knew what she was told by these people, and then by going into the actual world she realizes half of that is not true. The truth is different from what she's been taught. I feel like it's kind of like commentary on cult culture, like being in a cult and maybe like stepping out of a cult. So I'm hoping it's gonna be something like that, and we're gonna have a bit more focus on that, because that would be very like a very interesting take on this kind of fantasy story. But also like overcoming a bit of a toxic relationship, like she's finally standing up for herself, she's choosing for herself instead of doing whatever Rian told her to. And it's also toxic from the fact that this is basically the only guy of her age that she knows. So she was almost like forced to marry him because it's the only thing she knows. So she makes herself in love, basically. You know what I mean? And then realizing there's more out there. Like, I'm not really hoping. Okay, what I'm thinking, maybe there will be a bit more between Garrett and Lochmar, the other country, and Faelan will come back. And then they would have like some sort of maybe enemies to lovers kind of thing. Because they had some chemistry going on while she was there. I don't know, it feels kind of like there could be some enemies to lovers kind of thing in there. I would prefer that than learning that Karlach is actually the bad guy and and Rian was right and she ends up going back to Rian. If that happens, I'ma throw the book out. I will cry. That would be terrible. She's going through all this character development, leaving the guy behind who's just controlling her life and her decisions. And also been controlling like her every thought. Like, she doesn't want to do anything unless it has to do with Rian. She literally said, like, if I can't live with him, I would rather live as a slave or just die. It's a bit like obsessive and not healthy. I don't know. I hope it will be some sort of commentary on that kind of thing. Like leaving a cult, learning to live your own life, leaving a toxic relationship, and hopefully finding something else and maybe restoring the bond with her father, or maybe realizing that she doesn't really need family. She only needs her found family, for example, and not like the family that she either grew up with or the family that was related by blood. And I also feel like, I don't know, that's what I was just realizing while I was going through the story again. Like I said in the beginning, she is very iffy about going into the forest. Like, even though she knows this is not the enchanted forest people are talking about, she's still really about going there. She doesn't want to go there, even though Rian gives her a treehouse there. She still doesn't go there, because the only reason she goes into a forest is because Rian is there. But I feel like maybe it's foreboding, because Rian basically is the forest, or at least he thinks he is king of the forest, and he is the forest, and he's like really connected to it. The fact that she is creeped out by the forest could be like foreboding of her being creeped out and not really happy with Rian and his personality, which does turn out to be true a tiny bit in the end when he kills a man. I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's a tiny bit like foreboding or something, and I found that very interesting. So I feel like at surface level, when you just go through this book and you're at first glance, you're like, oh my god, what the fuck is this incest? Why do we have incest going on? But if you kind of like start looking through the layers of the book, it starts going a bit deeper and just see like what it actually means, and then it's quite positive. So I'm just hoping that this is kind of the character arc that she's gonna go through, because that means that this book is actually a commentary on that. And if it goes the other way around, then it's just weird incest, and I don't like it. I did enjoy this book a lot, but to enjoy the meaning of the book, I need to know what happens next, and we need to discuss that and dive deep into that. That was book 1, The Gardener Kings by Monica Boothe. We have a makeup look. We have discussed the entire plotline of the book, the most important points. We have discussed all the goods and the bads and some speculations for the next book. So I feel like that is finally the ending of this video. I will be beginning to read book 2 today in the train. So I am very excited to see what happens there. And then in the next video we'll discuss that. Next week's video. It's gonna probably be a different video in between. All the products I used, I will link them down below. Let me know your thoughts on this book. Will you still read it after this? Because you know what would be fun? Like, you know the story of book 1 now. What if before next week, before the next video comes out, you read part 2? Just like me? And then we can have a discussion in the comments about book 2. Just only do this if you have time for it and if you want to do it, of course. But that seems like fun. It's almost like a little book club. Like, we should read book 2 basically together and then discuss it at one point. That would be fun. So, yeah, that's it. Let me know what you think of the book. Let me know your thoughts on the incest and everything. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. If you want to see even more from me, my blog, my socials, my gaming channel, and everything else you need to know about me is all linked down below, so you can check that out as well. That's gonna be it for me today, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Toodles!